The blizzard hit without warning, which Nia thought was fitting. Everything in her life happened without warning. Rejection, banishment, and now, apparently, freezing to death in the mountains with her 2 baby girls. She'd been walking for 6 hours since the Silver Lake pack had cast her out. Her thin cloak did nothing against the wind that cut through her like knives, but she didn't feel the cold on her own skin. She only felt the terrifying shivering of Maya and Mila, the twin 4-year-olds strapped tightly to her chest and back beneath the layers of fabric. Nia's dark braids whipped around her face in the brutal gusts. Her skin, usually a warm, rich brown, had taken on an ashen tinge from the bitter cold. Her eyes could barely see through the driving snow that seemed determined to blind her. "Mama, cold," Mila whimpered against her neck, her voice barely a ghost of a sound over the howling wind. "I know, baby. I know," Nia whispered back, her teeth chattering. "Just a little longer. Mama's going to find us a warm spot." But deep down, Nia knew they were going to die. The rejection ceremony had been this morning, and by tonight they would be frozen corpses in the wilderness. There was a certain poetry to it, she supposed. Born unwanted, died alone. A life bookend by rejection. Her own parents had abandoned her at the pack's border, leaving her with nothing but questions. And now, history was repeating itself with her daughters. The pack had taken her in out of obligation to Moon Goddess Law, but they never let her forget she was an outsider. She'd never known love, never known belonging, never known anything but the knowledge that she was different, and that difference was dangerous. When she'd presented as an Omega, there'd been a brief flicker of hope. Omegas were valuable. They could bear strong pups, could soothe pack tensions. But Nia came with complications, twin daughters from a rogue who had vanished before they were born. At 25, she was the oldest unclaimed Omega in the pack, an embarrassment they couldn't quite figure out what to do with. Then Garrett had solved their problem. Garrett, a mid-ranking beta who'd been assigned to mate with her because no one else would volunteer. He'd taken one look at her on their wedding day, at the 2 little girls clinging to her dress, and he'd publicly rejected her in front of the entire pack. "I won't mate with a woman who brings another man's litter to my table," he'd said, his voice carrying across the ceremony clearing with cruel clarity. "She's tainted. Damaged goods. I want a real Omega, not a babysitter. Look at her. She brings nothing but baggage. I refuse." The pack had agreed enthusiastically. The Alpha had banished her immediately, not even giving her time to gather proper supplies or say goodbye to the few people who'd shown her kindness. Just a cloak, the clothes on her back, and orders to be gone before sunset or face execution for trespassing. So, she'd walked into the mountains, into the coming storm, because where else was there to go? Chapter 1. The wind screamed like a scorned bride, tearing at the thin wool of my cloak until I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. It was ironic, really. I was supposed to be wearing white today. I was supposed to be standing under a canopy of woven birch branches, promising my life to a man who had promised to protect me. Instead, the white surrounding me was a shroud of snow, and the only vows I was making were whispered pleas to my freezing children. "Hold on, Maya. Stay awake, Mila," I murmured, my voice lost in the gale. They were dead weight against my chest and back, their shivering slowing down to a terrifying, lethargic rhythm. The memory of the morning played on a loop in my mind, sharper than the ice crystals stinging my cheeks. I could still see Garrett standing at the altar, looking at me not with love, but with the same distaste one might look at a stained rug. "I won't do it," he had said, his voice ringing out over the hushed crowd of the Silver Lake pack. He pointed a finger at the 2 little girls clinging to the skirts of my simple cream dress. "I agreed to an Omega. I didn't agree to a broodmare with another rogue's baggage. Look at them. They're mongrels." The shame had burned hotter than fire. My parents, who had abandoned me years ago, weren't there to defend me. No one was. The Alpha had stepped forward, not to chastise Garrett, but to sever the tie completely. "An unclaimed Omega with pups is a drain on resources we cannot afford in winter," he had declared, his eyes cold. "You leave by sunset, Nia. Or we let the enforcers hunt you for sport. I stumbled, my boot catching on a buried root, and fell hard into a drift. The impact knocked the breath out of me. I lay there for a second, the snow instantly beginning to bury me. It would be so easy to just stay here. To let the cold numb the heartache until everything went black. Get up. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't a sound, exactly, but a vibration in the base of my skull. A tug. I blinked, wiping ice from my lashes. The world was a whiteout, a chaotic swirl of gray and white that hid the horizon. But then I felt it again, a distinct, magnetic pull in the center of my chest. It felt like a hook had been set in my heart, reeling me in toward the left, toward the jagged face of the mountain that everyone said was impassable. To my eyes, there was nothing there but a sheer drop and jagged rocks. But my blood sang with a sudden, inexplicable certainty. Safe. Warm. There. It was madness. It was suicide. But the twins were silent now, and that terrified me more than the storm. One more step, I whispered, forcing my frozen limbs to obey the strange command. Just one more. I turned away from the trail and pushed blindly into the deep snow, following the invisible thread that promised salvation in the heart of the killing frost. Chapter 2. The cave mouth swallowed us, cutting off the scream of the wind as if a heavy door had slammed shut. Silence, sudden and ringing, filled my ears. I sagged against the rough stone wall, sliding down until my knees hit the dirt, clutching the girls tighter. We were out of the wind. We were alive. But the silence wasn't empty. A low, vibrating growl rumbled through the darkness, raising the hair on my arms. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded like the earth itself shifting. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, widened in horror. We weren't alone. Curled in the shadows were wolves, 12 of them. They were massive, their bodies easily double the size of the timber wolves I was used to seeing in the forests. Their fur was a stark, ghostly white that seemed to hold its own light in the dim cavern. But they weren't posturing to attack. They were broken. Blood matted their pristine coats. Some shivered violently, their massive frames seizing with the same cold that had nearly claimed me. They lay in a defensive circle, a wall of fur and teeth, but the air smelled of iron and sickness, not aggression. "Mama?" Maya whispered, her small hand gripping my frozen cheek. "Puppies?" "Shoo," I breathed, terror seizing my heart. These weren't puppies. These were apex predators. My instinct screamed at me to run, to drag my babies back into the storm rather than face a pack of injured, desperate monsters. But I looked closer. The wolf nearest to me had a gash along its flank that was weeping sluggishly. Another was panting in shallow, rattled gasps. They were dying. Just like us. My healer's heart, the one part of me the pack hadn't managed to kill, gave a painful throb. I couldn't leave them. And I couldn't take the girls back out there. The storm was a guaranteed death, the wolves were only a potential one. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. The movement drew 12 pairs of eyes, silver, blue, and gold, locking onto me with terrifying intelligence. The largest wolf lay in the center. He was a behemoth, his fur thick and white as a cloud, but his eyes were a piercing, electric blue that pinned me to the spot in Alpha. Even in this form, the authority rolling off him was suffocating. He watched me with a stillness that felt less like an animal and more like a king evaluating a trespasser. I took a step forward, holding my empty hands out, palms up. I felt the twins tense against me, but I projected every ounce of calm I possessed. "I'm not going to hurt you," I whispered, my voice cracking from the cold. The alpha watched me, his gaze shifting to the children strapped to my chest, then back to my eyes. He didn't snarl. He was assessing me. "I can help," I murmured, forcing my feet to move despite the screaming protest of my survival instincts. "I can make fire. I can bind the wounds." I took another step, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm going to help you, if you'll let me." The alpha held my gaze for an eternity. Then, he let out a soft, huffing breath, not a growl, but a sigh, and lowered his massive head to his paws. It wasn't submission. It was permission. Chapter 3. The Alpha's acceptance hung in the air, a fragile truce that did nothing to chase away the bone-deep chill settling into the cavern. The wolves were shivering, their massive bodies vibrating against the stone floor, and the twins' lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. We needed heat, and we needed it now. Stay here with the puppies, I whispered to Maya and Mila, tucking them into a dry divot in the rock near the wolf circle. Mama has to find wood. I didn't have a map, but I had that hum, the magnetic pull in my chest that had led me here. It tugged me deeper into the cave's throat, past the circle of predators and into the suffocating dark. I ran my hands along the wall, trusting the instinct more than my eyes. 50 feet back, the cave narrowed, and there, sheltered in a dry alcove, I found a cache. It was a stack of cured firewood, a rusted tin containing flint and steel, and a pile of dry tinder. It looked like a hunter's stash abandoned years ago, waiting for a desperate woman to claim it. I dragged the supplies back to the main chamber, my breath hitching in my chest. The wolves watched me, their heads lifting as I dumped the wood in the center of their circle. Lighting the fire was a war against my own body. My fingers were numb, senseless blocks of ice that refused to grip the flint. I struck the steel. A spark flared and died. I struck again. Nothing. The cold seemed to laugh at me, blowing the tiny heat away before it could catch. Panic, sharp and acrid, rose in my throat. If I couldn't do this, the miracle of finding the cave meant nothing. Come on, I hissed, tears of frustration pricking my eyes. Please. I struck one last time, shielding the tinder with my entire body. A spark landed, held, and grew. I blew on it gently, feeding it dry moss until a small, orange tongue of flame licked the air. I fed it sticks, then logs, until the fire roared to life, pushing the shadows back and filling the cave with life-saving warmth. The wolves inched closer immediately, drawn to the heat like moths. But warmth wasn't enough, the metallic scent of blood was still thick in the air. I looked at my heavy wool cloak, the only thing I had left to my name, the only barrier between me and the storm. With a shaking hand, I unclasped it. I used the sharp edge of a loose stone to tear the lining into long strips. I filled a hollow in the rock with snow, placing it near the fire to melt into water. I need to clean your hurts, I told the pack softly. I moved to the nearest wolf, dipping a strip of my cloak into the warm water. I washed the grit from their gashes and bound their wounds with the wool of my own coat, working with a focus that pushed away my exhaustion. When I reached the Alpha, he didn't growl. He simply watched me with those piercing blue eyes, lifting his massive head to let me bind the deep cut on his neck, his trust a heavy, silent weight in my hands. Chapter 4. The fire crackled, a small, defiant heartbeat against the encroaching dark. It wasn't enough to battle the sub-zero draft seeping in from the cave mouth, and the wolves knew it. Without a sound, the pack began to move. It was a fluid, coordinated shift, a tide of white fur closing the distance between us. I stiffened, instinctively pulling Maya and Mila into my lap, but the wolves didn't bare their teeth. They laid down around us, body pressing against body, creating a living, breathing barrier against the cold. Big doggy's warm, Mila mumbled sleepily, burying her face into the thick ruff of the wolf beside her. Yes, baby, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes at the surreal mercy of it. Very warm. We were the center of a living nest. The Alpha settled last, his massive body curling around my back, a solid wall of heat that stopped my shivering almost instantly. The exhaustion I had been fighting hit me then, a tidal wave threatening to drag me under, but I couldn't sleep. The fire needed feeding. The guard needed keeping. I began to hum. It was a low, mournful tune, a lullaby my mother had never sung to me, one I had invented for the girls when the nights in the pack house were too cold and too lonely. The wind blows cold, the night is deep, but in the den, the shadows sleep. My voice was raspy, but it carried in the stillness. The wolves' ears twitched toward me. One by one, their breathing slowed, syncing with the rhythm of the song. The tension drained from their injured bodies. I stoked the fire, feeding it another piece of dry wood, and found the alpha's ice blue eyes watching me. He hadn't slept. He was watching the entrance, watching the fire, watching me. You should rest, I murmured to him, my hand hovering over his broad head before daring to stroke the soft fur between his ears. You lost a lot of blood. He didn't pull away. He leaned into my touch, letting out a heavy sigh that rattled in his chest. I know what it's like, I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. In the safety of the dark, with only a beast to hear me, the dam broke. To be responsible for everyone. To be the one who has to stay awake. I looked down at the twins, their breathing soft and even. They said I was broken. Damaged goods. That's what Garrett called me today. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. He said he wouldn't take a mate who came with baggage. As if my daughters were heavy luggage I could just leave at the station. The alpha's head lifted slightly, his gaze intensifying. I thought if I just worked harder, if I was quieter, more useful, they would overlook the fact that I wasn't born with a silver spoon. That they would forgive me for loving a rogue who died before he could claim me. I wiped a tear from my cheek, staring into the wolf's intelligent eyes. But you can't work your way out of being unwanted, can you? You're either pack or you're prey. The wolf made a low sound in his throat, a rumble of disagreement that vibrated against my spine. He shifted, resting his heavy chin on my knee, looking up at me with a fierce, possessive clarity that made my heart stutter. You're a good listener, I said softly, scratching behind his ear. Better than any man I've ever met. I leaned my head back against the stone, the heat of the alpha seeping into my bones, keeping the nightmare at bay for one more hour. Chapter 5. Dawn didn't break, it shattered the darkness with a blinding, diamond-hard clarity. I woke not to the howling wind, but to a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums. The fire had burned down to embers, a pile of gray ash and glowing orange hearts, but the warmth that had sustained me through the night, the living, breathing heat of the alpha, was gone. I sat up with a gasp, my hands instinctively reaching for the girls. They were still asleep, curled together like kittens in the nest of pine boughs I'd made, their cheeks pink and warm. We were alive. Against every odd, against the lethal malice of the storm, we had survived. A wave of relief so potent it made me dizzy washed over me. I turned to thank the wolves, to stroke the alpha's head one last time before. The air in the cave buckled. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. The space where the 12 wolves had been sleeping shimmered like a heat mirage on asphalt. The light bent, fractured, and then resolved into shapes that were terrifyingly, unmistakably human. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the cold stone wall, my body acting as a shield for the twins. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, sure I was hallucinating from hypothermia, but the sound of heavy breathing and the rustle of movement was real. When I opened my eyes, the wolves were gone. In their place stood 12 men. They were massive, filling the cavern with an overwhelming amount of testosterone and raw power. They stood in a loose protective circle, their bodies corded with muscle and marked with the pale, silver lines of old scars. They were stark naked, unashamed, and moving with the lethal grace of soldiers. I choked on a scream, my hands flying up to cover Maya and Mila's sleeping faces, my own face burning with a sudden, scorching heat. At ease, a deep voice commanded. It was a voice I recognized, the same low rumble that had vibrated against my spine all night, the same timbre that had huffed in agreement when I poured out my heart. The circle parted. A man stepped forward. He was towering, easily 6.5 feet of golden skin and hardened muscle. His hair was a thick, messy shock of dark blonde, and his jaw was covered in stubble. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart, piercing, electric blue. The alpha. He didn't look at his men. He looked only at me. He moved with a predator's confidence, grabbing a discarded fur pelt from the corner to wrap around his waist before kneeling in the dirt before me. The movement brought him to my eye level, but he still seemed to loom, radiating power. You. I whispered, the realization crashing down on me. I talked to you. I told you everything. He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched, softening the harsh, angular lines of his face. He reached out, his hand hovering near my knee, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. You did, he murmured. And I listened to every word. He held my gaze, his expression shifting from amusement to a profound, terrifying gratitude. I am Declan Thorne, he said, the weight of the name settling over the cave like a crown. I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. These are my elite guard. And we owe you our lives. Chapter 6. The silence in the cave was broken not by a command, but by a murmur of awe that rippled through the 12 men standing before me. One by one, the elite guard dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in a gesture of profound respect that made my breath hitch. We should be dead, said a guard with silver-streaked hair, his voice rough with emotion. The frost had settled in our marrow. Any other wolf would have run from a pack in that state. You stayed. You shared your heat, another added, looking at the twins who were still sleeping soundly, unaware they were surrounded by the deadliest warriors in the north. You put your own pups at risk to save strangers. That isn't survival instinct. That is grace. I pressed my back against the cold stone, overwhelmed. I didn't do anything special, I stammered, my hands trembling as I pulled my cloak tighter around myself. I couldn't let you die. Exactly. Declan remained standing, a towering figure of golden skin and raw power, but his eyes were soft as they held mine. He stepped closer, the movement fluid and predatory, yet entirely non-threatening. He looked at me as if I were a riddle he had finally solved. I have spent 5 years searching for a Luna, Declan said, his voice low and vibrating with intensity. I didn't need a warrior to lead armies, Mia. I have generals for that. I didn't need a politician. I needed a heart. He knelt then, ignoring the dirt on his knees, bringing his face level with mine. The legends speak of the Pathfinder gift, an instinct rare as a white stag. It guides the bearer to safety when all hope is lost, but more importantly, it guides them to those who need saving. My brow furrowed. I don't have a gift. I'm just an Omega. My pack said. Your pack was blind, he cut in, a flash of anger darkening his gaze before it cleared. You found this cave in a whiteout. You found the hidden supplies. You healed 12 dying wolves with nothing but snow and your own clothes. That wasn't luck. That was the Pathfinder waking up. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently covering mine. The heat of his skin was shocking against my cold fingers. The blizzard was a crucible, he whispered. A test that no council could design. Most would have seen 12 injured beasts and seen a threat, or a burden. You saw a pack in need. You gave everything you had, your warmth, your voice, your protection, without knowing who we were. Without asking for a reward. Without knowing if you'd survive the night yourself. He looked past me to Maya and Mila, his expression softening into something devastatingly tender. You saved us because it is who you are, Declan vowed, his thumb brushing my knuckles. And that is why you are the only one worthy to stand beside me. Chapter 7. I can't give you an answer today, I said, my voice quiet but steady against the backdrop of the waking mountain. I pulled the twins closer, their small bodies a grounding weight against my chest. I've been discarded too many times to trust a promise just because it sounds pretty. I need to see if this life is real. If it's safe for them. Declan didn't look offended. He looked relieved. That is all I ask, he said, rising from his knees. Come to the Northern Territories. See the home I want to build with you. Then decide. So, we walked. The journey out of the mountains was nothing like the death march that had brought me there. This time, I wasn't stumbling alone into the whiteout. I was surrounded by a phalanx of the deadliest warriors in the world, yet I had never felt safer. The elite guard, terrifying in their efficiency, melted the moment they looked at Maya and Mila. Frost, a tracker with hair the color of polished silver, made it his personal mission to make Mila laugh, turning snowflakes into tiny, dancing shapes with a touch of minor magic I hadn't known wolves possessed. Ash, the pack's medic, checked on us every hour, his hands gentle and professional as he ensured the frostbite hadn't settled deep in the girl's toes. "You're staring again," Storm said on the second day, falling into step beside me. He was the one who had helped navigate the treacherous pass, reading the wind like a map. "I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop," I admitted, hoisting Maya higher on my hip. "I'm waiting for you all to realize I'm just a stray Omega who got lucky finding that cave." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Storm said, his expression turning serious. "You're a Pathfinder, Nia. Do you know how long it's been since a wolf with that gift was born?" I shook my head. "My old pack said I was cursed. That I was bad luck because trouble always seemed to find me." "Not trouble," Ash corrected, overhearing us. "Truth. The Pathfinder gift pulls you toward what is necessary. It guides you to safety when the world wants you dead." "It guided you to us," Declan added from up ahead, turning back to catch my eye. He moved through the deep snow as if it were paved road, clearing a path for me. "You felt a pull, didn't you? A hook in your chest?" "Yes," I whispered. "I thought I was losing my mind." "You were finding your destiny," Declan said firmly. "That isn't a curse, Nia. It's a compass. Your old pack punished you for being different because they were too weak to understand the value of what you carried. We don't make that mistake in the north." I looked down at the path we were walking, not a retreat, but an arrival. For the first time in my life, the difference in my blood didn't feel like a stain. It felt like a map, and finally, I was heading in the right direction. Chapter 8. The Northern Crown stronghold didn't look like a place where people lived, it looked like a place where legends went to rest. As we crested the final ridge, the fortress revealed itself, built directly into the glacier with ice and stone creating structures that glittered in the sunlight like a city of diamonds. It was alien and beautiful, a seamless blend of the natural mountain and ancient architecture. "Welcome home," Declan said, his voice rumbling against my back where I rode behind him on the snowmobile, the twins sandwiched safely between us. My stomach twisted, not with motion sickness, but with a sudden, sharp spike of fear. Home was a dangerous word. Home was a place that could kick you out. As we entered the main gates, the pack emerged to greet us. I instinctively stiffened, my hands gripping Maya and Mila's coats, preparing to shield them from the sneers and whispered insults I had endured for years at Silver Lake. I expected them to look at my dark skin and my fatherless children and see an intruder. I was wrong. There were hundreds of them, all healthy and strong, their breath misting in the cold air. When Declan cut the engine and helped me down, a hush fell over the crowd. He didn't hide me. He placed a hand on the small of my back and presented me to them. "This is Nia," he announced, his voice carrying without effort. "The Pathfinder who saved the guard." The cheering was immediate and deafening. It rolled over us like a physical wave. People didn't recoil, they bowed. They pressed forward not to jeer, but to offer gifts, furs, carved bone, and preserved foods, placing them at my feet with genuine respect. An elderly woman with kind eyes stepped forward, smiling at the twins, who were staring wide-eyed at the spectacle. "We have been waiting for you," she said warmly, treating me like a returning daughter rather than a stray. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, and it terrified me. Later, in the guest suite that was larger than my entire childhood home, I paced the floor while the girls slept. The luxury felt like a trap. The kindness felt like a precursor to a cruel joke. I caught my reflection in the mirror, a tired Omega with road-worn clothes and a history of rejection. I felt like a fraud. I felt that at any moment, Declan would walk in, see me for who I really was, just a rejected wolf with too much baggage, and the dream would shatter. I was afraid of the warmth, afraid of the acceptance, and terrified of the fragile happiness that was daring to take root in my chest. It is easier to survive the cold when you expect it, it is the hope of spring that breaks you. Chapter 9. "You are watering dead roots while the flower is already blooming," Senna said, her hands busy sorting dried sage on the wooden table. I looked up from the herbs I was crushing, startled by the old healer's sharpness. I'm just afraid, Senna. What if they wake up and realize I'm not enough? What if I'm just a charity case? Charity? Senna scoffed gently, stopping her work to fix me with a knowing gaze. Child, that man is the Alpha King. He doesn't do charity, he does strategy. And he chose you. She reached across the table, covering my hand. You are letting the ghosts of your old pack haunt a house they have never even visited. Declan didn't choose a pedigree. He chose the woman who kept him alive when he was helpless. He chose the mother who puts her children before her own breath. If that isn't worthy of a crown, I don't know what is. The knot of anxiety in my chest, the one I had carried since the rejection ceremony, finally began to loosen. Senna was right. I was done letting fear make my decisions. I found Declan on the balcony overlooking the ice gardens, the aurora borealis painting the sky in ribbons of green and violet. He turned the moment I opened the door, his ice-blue eyes wide with immediate concern. Nia? He took a step forward. Is something wrong? The twins? No, I said, a smile breaking through the clouds in my mind. Nothing is wrong. For the first time, everything is right. I crossed the distance between us, taking his calloused hands in mine. I'm done running, Declan. I'm done waiting for the other shoe to drop. You asked me to stay, to build a home here. I looked up at him, letting all the love I had been holding back flood into my voice. My answer is yes. I will be your Luna. Declan didn't speak. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my neck, holding me as if I were the most precious thing in his kingdom. I love you, he whispered roughly against my skin. I have loved you since the moment you walked into that cave. The mating ceremony took place 2 weeks later under the full moon. I didn't wear the simple, shameful clothes of a rejected Omega. I wore a gown of white fur and ice-blue silk that shimmered like the glacier itself. The elite guard stood as our witnesses, no longer wolves in the dark, but brothers in the light. When Declan marked me, claiming me before the moon goddess and the pack, the cheer that erupted shook the very mountains. Years later, I would sit in the gardens with young wolves who had been cast out by their own packs, holding their trembling hands just as Senna had held mine. I would tell them the story of the blizzard and the cave. I was nobody, I would tell them, smiling as I watched Declan teaching Maya and Mila to trek in the snow below. But rejection isn't an ending. It's just a redirection. It's the universe moving you out of the way so you can find where you truly belong.